All right, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Baker Institute, we'd like to welcome you to this afternoon discussion on the evolving immigration debate organized by the Bipartisan Policy Center. Over the last year, the Baker Institute has paid close attention to this important topic. We've produced policy recommendations for the second Obama administration, and as the Gang of Eight unveiled their proposal, we had an all-day conference where economists, sociologists, policy experts, and others presented findings on the research, which is available on our webpage. We have a tight agenda, so without further ado, please help me welcome Becky Talent, the Bipartisan Policy Center Director of the Immigration Policy Center. Becky.
Hi, and welcome everyone. We're glad that you took time out of your hot and sticky Houston day to come and join us here. The Bipartisan Policy Center was founded by Majority Leaders Dole, Daschle, Baker, and Mitchell as a place to have vigorous debate and respectful dialogue about the important issues that are facing our country today. And along that vein, we stood up the Immigration Task Force in February, which is co-chaired by Secretary Cisneros, Governor Barber, Governor Ed Rendell from Pennsylvania, and Dr. Condoleezza Rice. Dr. Rice and Governor Rendell weren't able to be with us today, but those are our four co-chairs. We have a task force of bipartisan leaders on the immigration issue, and many of them are here today. I already introduced our co-chairs. Secretary Michael Chertoff is there on the end. In the front row here, we have Chairman Al Cardenas. We have Mr. Ed Brady, we have Secretary Hilda Solis, we have Mr. Eliseo Medina, and we have former Congressman John Shadegg. They will all be able to answer your questions as the event moves forward today. With the Immigration Task Force, we're trying to help this debate move along and weigh in on the important issues that are facing the immigration debate. I'm sure that you all have been reading the paper that this is moving very quickly, and our goal is to facilitate that process while adding substantively to the conversation. Along those lines, today I think we'll be discussing anything that you would like to bring up, but specifically it will be focusing on the issue of border security and the revelations of what's been coming out of the House and what's been coming out of the Senate and what that means for the national security issues for our country. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Governor Barber, and after some brief remarks by the gentleman sitting here at the table, we'll open it up for questions. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Becky. And first, thanks to Houston, to Rice, and to the Baker Institute for allowing us to be here. We've enjoyed our stay. I'm the only one here who thinks it's normal weather. 110 humidity to match, just like home, Governor. But we are here working on a very important subject, a subject, as you know, that the U.S. Senate has passed their version of a comprehensive immigration bill. The House is now beginning to deal with it. As you can see, each one of them is taking a thorough process, but very different process. And we respect that. We are bipartisan. We've been in Ed Rendell, the governor of Pennsylvania, not only a Democrat, but a Democrat Party chairman, the national party chairman, as I was the National Republican Party chairman. But one of the things that we've seen here is that you can disagree on some of these issues and do it respectfully. We do sometimes in our own task force group. And so we recognize that in the Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate. Different people got different ideas, and honorable people can come at this from different directions. It does seem clear that the House process will obviously yield a different comprehensive immigration reform that apparently will be passed in pieces. I should say to you that under the rules in the House, legislation that's related can pass the House in several pieces and then be rolled together, what is called engrossed, and it can be conferenced with the Senate, with a Senate bill that way. So I think that's a question that some people will have asked us before. I'm involved in this because I think we are in a global battle for capital and labor. and that we need more labor, not just H-1B visas, not just PhDs from Rice University, from India that can work in technology, science, engineering, or math. But we also we have essential workers in other areas, including some low-skilled areas where we need the labor. And a lot of us come at this from different ways. That is my view about this, and that the politics of it can be whatever it is. But I do understand well enough that politics makes a difference. So we are trying, as we work through this, first with the Senate and with the House, to try to show them that this is good politics for them, because it's good policy. If you want to get economic growth back up to 4% in our country, we've got to have more labor. If you want to keep our country healthy, and I don't mean that purely medically, but we don't want to become an aging population like Japan, or like Germany, or like Spain, or so many other countries that are literally losing population, and that is a fiscal time bomb. So as I turn it over to Mr. Secretary Cisneros, your neighbor, know that, again, he's going to talk, and Mike's going to talk about mostly what we did today, but I wanted you to be aware, a lot of different ideas coming together with the goal that we have a good immigration reform bill that's good for our country economically, and that I think one thing we all agree on is the status quo is unacceptable. 10 more years of what we got now is a ticking time bomb, and so we all believe we got to have immigration reform. Ms. Secretary.
Governor, thank you. It's a special honor to serve as a co-chair with Governor Barbour, who has already been around the country speaking on this subject very courageously. It's very important to have the former chairman of the Republican Party, a person who served as a governor of a southern state, who's well respected across the country by the conservative and business community, speaking his convictions on this question of immigration. So thank you, Governor, very much. And it's an honor to serve as well with the other members of this commission, who hopefully, as the questions occur, you'll have the opportunity to hear from them and meet them. I also want to add my thanks to Rice University and to the Baker Center. Had the opportunity to visit with Secretary Baker earlier this year about having this meeting here, and it's a treat to see this great city, Houston, one of the great cities of our country and indeed the world, have this focal point for public policy discussions here at the Baker Center in the name of a great Secretary of State for our country. The Bipartisan Policy Center is focusing on immigration in a slightly different way than it normally does its business. As Becky mentioned and the governor mentioned, this is a bipartisan assembly that has focused over the years since its founding in 2006 on a range of subjects: energy, infrastructure, health care, deficit and debt reduction, housing issues, and now on immigration. The approach on immigration is different than the normal process, in that normally what the BPC does is it looks at something long range, pulls in the best researchers, best data, and at the end of the process, a year later, 18 months later, puts forward, a chart, a map, a plan for how the country ought to address that issue. Immigration doesn't lend itself to that because it is real time. It's happening as we speak. So this commission is playing a different role, which is to try to weigh in and try to untie some of the Gordian knots, if you will, in this problem set. And today our work has been about focusing on those areas where the Senate has passed a bill, very important, very courageous on the part of the Senate, did the country a real service, including the late amendments on border security that made it possible to get that kind of bipartisan vote that occurred. And now the action shifts to the House. And the question is, where are the differences that might enable the House to also be supportive of an immigration reform measure? Where are the areas of improvement, or the difficult subject areas where a bipartisan group might offer some suggestions? So today this group has been focusing on 5 themes that we think, each of which has some argument or case to be made. 1, controlling the flow of undocumented immigration, which, as you'll hear from a moment from former Homeland Security Secretary Chertoff, is more than border security. It's more than the border. It speaks to interior issues and employment issues. If the issue is the magnitude, the scale, and the flow of undocumented immigrants, then how do we address that, and how does the House and the country get comfortable with that issue? Secondly, the issue of legal immigration, the need for workers, the so-called H-1B technical workers in the computer and STEM fields, the agriculture workers needed to raise the crops in our country and process them, and other industries that require a substantial stream of workers. So that whole subject area, including the subject of things, for example, as the dreamers, the young people who came here as children and who have excelled in American schools and colleges, but are technically still undocumented and need to be thought of in a different way. Thirdly, the economic impacts, both in terms of costs to the American budget, to the U.S. budget, but also the economic benefits writ large in the larger economy. So we're looking at how we can maybe better articulate the numbers, better interpret those costs, and offer them to the American people in a way that makes sense. Fourthly, we've talked about the mechanics of the legalization of the 12 million or so people who are here today undocumented and who we know are not going to be deported. It's just not a practical reality that 12 million people can be deported. And oh, by the way, we need them at work in the country. So what's the proper mechanics? The Senate has laid out some measures which may or may not be acceptable to the House. And so we need to explore where are the touch points, where are the improvements that can be made in the legalization process. And finally, the importance of a path to citizenship, a process by which people who can earn citizenship, who choose to be citizens of this country, and who can do so without displacing anyone else who's in the line before them, but something that's fair and just and rewards people who make a contribution to our country, live by our laws, commit to American life, and have a place in our society for the long haul. So those are the sort of the themes that we're working through, and again, very specifically, our job, I think, right at this moment, is to look at the differences between the House and the Senate and see how a group of citizens who have been in public service in many instances, others who have experience in the American business community, but who have something to say and have some voice that might be helpful in finding the interstices, breaking the log jams and trying to move us along toward immigration reform. I want to introduce Secretary Michael Chertoff. I want to take one point of personal privilege before I do, however, and that is just as the Baker Center has attracted many stellar public figures, there's one other in the audience today, and that is our former governor of Texas, Mark White. Mark, glad to have you here. Governor White is one of those Houstonians who has served our state and our country like Secretary Baker and like President Bush and others who call this city home and have served this state and this country. Secretary Chertoff was the second Secretary of Homeland Security. New job, as it was created after 9/11, and as you will hear from him in just a moment, is a font of knowledge and experience and information on the precise issues that the country needs to get confidence about as we work on immigration reform.
Well, thanks very much. And I want to echo my gratitude to Rice for hosting us and to the Bipartisan Policy Center for establishing this task force. It's a great privilege to work with a distinguished bipartisan group of colleagues and also an outstanding staff, which has done a great job of doing a lot of the research and development of the facts, which are going to be very important as we move forward with this. I spent, during my 4 years as Secretary of Homeland Security, I spent a lot of time in Texas and spent a lot of time on the border in Texas and in Arizona, New Mexico, and California. Probably walked, horseback rode, drove, or flew over every square inch at least once. And that's because the issue of security was obviously top of the list of things I faced as Homeland Security Secretary. It's a very challenging issue. And there are strong views on a variety of the dimensions of what's required to have border security, and they will have to be taken seriously. But I think there are a couple of observations that I would make that have formed the basis of some of our discussion this morning, and hopefully will do so as we move forward to try to make a contribution in this area. The first is when you talk about border security, and people here are from a border state, so they'll understand what I mean. It's not just about 1 mile north of the Rio Grande River or the border between Arizona and Mexico or New Mexico and Mexico. It's about the whole country. Because although what we have on the border itself is important, how we deal with people who come in legally and overstay is equally important. The employment, which draws many of the people illegally like a magnet, is a very important element in a strategy to deal with controlling the flow of undocumented workers. So as we look strategically at how to develop a policy to ensure control of the flow of workers from outside the country, we have to look not only at the perimeter, not only at the land, we have to look at the sea, we have to look at the air, we have to look at those who cross without permission and those who come in with permission and don't leave. And we have to look at employers, because without employers who are willing to hire people who are here illegally, much of the demand which pulls these people would not be there. And so our approach in looking at what we might do to contribute to the problem is to be holistic and to look at all of the dimensions of what has given rise over decades to a large pool of people who are living and working here, but doing so without permission. The second issue I think we want to deal with is the issue of trust. And as I watched the debate back in 2007, and as I watch it now, in many cases what we are really arguing about is how do we trust whether we have achieved results? There's been a lot of talk about the kind of capabilities you want to deploy at the border, technology, fencing, deployment of personnel. But in the end, what matters is the result. Did we succeed or not succeed? And I think we've struggled with how do we measure that. So part of what we've talked about today is how do we develop a trusted, verifiable, independent basis for determining whether we have achieved results. Part of that means understanding and defining what those results are. What does it mean to say we have controlled the border? Second, we need to have an audit capability that people will accept as a valid test of whether we have succeeded in meeting the standard that we've set. And it has to be independent and composed of people who are trusted by Republicans and Democrats, by people all over the country, as giving an honest judgment about the results that have been achieved. So I think these two principles, taking a broad look at the problem in all of its dimensions and having a trusted way of verifying results, will be key to our recommendations about how we proceed with immigration reform over the next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Becky, you're going to moderate some questions, and we'll help direct them, including to the commissioners who haven't spoken to this point.
So we'll open it up for questions. If there are any members of the press here, we'll take your questions first. Or not.
Famous guy named Joe Hawley up there at the in the corner.
We'll open it up for questions now.
Governor Barber, with all due respect, it's your party that seems to be a roadblock toward immigration reform. Is there anything that can persuade your fellow party members to accept immigration reform?
Well, Joe, in all due respect, the last time we passed immigration reform was under a Republican president, and Mike sitting down here at the end of the table, he's the next president who tried to pass immigration reform was a Republican president from your state. But there are a lot of Republicans in the House and Senate who are concerned. One of the concerns they have, Secretary Chertoff has just spoken to. I was in the White House in 1986, political director for President Reagan when we passed Simpson-Mazzoli. And if you ask Alan Simpson today, why didn't it work, he will tell you. Because the first thing we told the American people was we were going to get control of the border, and we never did it. And so I think people in America who want to be assured, who want to have some of that trust and confidence that Secretary Chertoff were talking about, I think they got a good point. However, I also think that a majority of Republicans would vote against the status quo in a heartbeat. Secondly, that a lot of them are looking for ways to feel like they can succeed in having outcomes that show that we have control of the border. And I think there are few Republicans in Congress who want to leave 11 or 12 million people living in the shadows. It's not good for our country. Other Republicans are like me. I am very interested in this because of economic considerations. We need this for economic growth. And so I think it is very not only possible, but likely that the House will pass a group of bills that, taken together, equal comprehensive immigration reform. And I think a vast majority of Republicans will vote for it. I hope some of the Democrats will. And, we got about a third of the Republicans in the Senate to vote for the Senate bill. And one of the things we're working on here is to try to make sure we have similar bipartisan support in the House.
Governor, we've got a couple of other leading conservatives and Republicans on the commission who are present. Al Cardenas from Florida has been the chairman of the Republican Party in Florida under Governor Jeb Bush, and presently chairman of the American Conservative Union. If you'd like to say a word, and Congressman Shadegg of Arizona, who has a lot of experience in a state where immigration has been a focal point, a leader of the Republican effort in that regard. If either one of you would like to speak up.
Sure.
Yeah, John, why don't you join me? Just in, I think it will be well put. Look, I think that the concern on our side of the political spectrum is that this is a very important, critical issue to America. There's concern that for about 30 years we haven't gotten it right. It's come to a point where we can't get it wrong, and we want to be deliberate as we go through this vetting process. Now, it's true that leaders from both parties are looking at the ultimate goal with the same hope that this can work, and perhaps the path to that goal may be a little different based on our respective parties' priorities. But by and large, as my colleagues have stated, I think we're coming to a conclusion that both parties need to agree that we need to improve our ability to have a say in who comes to America and who doesn't, and to know who's here, and to have a better vetting process as to that. We live in a global economy. I think both sides agree that you need to have skilled workers that can match the needs of the country in these various areas. And third, I think you have an agreement on the part of both parties that you have to have a process that treats fairly and according to the rule of law, the 11 or so million people who are undocumented in this country. And there are various opinions as to how you go about that. And frankly, that's what Congress ought to be about. The vetting of these ideas so that hopefully we can reach some compromise that's fair for our country. And as to this latter issue, it's become somewhat somewhat emotional because we want to get it done just right. People have different perspectives as to how that process should take place. But I think the Senate did a remarkable job in coming to a conclusion. My sense is that houses may be a bit different, but I think both chambers will agree that we want people to come out of the shadows. We want people in an economy that thrives on a strong middle class to have the opportunity to receive reasonable wages and not be exploited and pay their fair share in every respect and live by the rule of law. And so we'll figure out how exactly we get there. Our job is to get together in a bipartisan fashion and offer recommendations and thoughts to those whose responsibility is to make the decision. But I'm confident that at the very end, path may be a little bumpy, but we'll get where we need to get.
I suppose it's difficult to add to the points that have been made, but let me just begin by first pointing out that it was a Republican president that did this last time, and it was a Republican president, President Bush, who tried to do it last time. The time after that, I was in the Congress at that point in time, and it was a challenging effort, and President Bush worked very hard at it. But this is, in fact, a difficult issue for the nation. It's about kind of defining what the nation is. I would say that the perception right now that it's the Republicans that stand in the way may be overstated, and even the negativity that is in the press in the last day, I believe, is overblown. The reality is, having served in one of the two institutions, it doesn't matter what the other institution puts out. If the Senate puts out a bill, the House doesn't like that bill. If the House puts out a bill, the Senate doesn't like that bill. And having been a House member and a passionate defender of the House, each of them represent different constituencies. Each of them stand for election at different points in time, and each of them have different perspectives. I believe, quite frankly, that it is the duty of the House now to address this issue substantively, and I think they will do that. And I think that Governor Barber said it well. Of course, they're going to be initially critical of the product the other party produced, but I don't know of anyone, certainly no one I believe in our task force, and I doubt if there's anyone in the country who thinks the Senate bill is perfect. I think indeed many of us recognize there are some significant flaws in the Senate bill. Now, there are some great things in the Senate bill, and I applaud them for producing a product, but now it falls to the House to try to look at some of the shortcomings of the Senate bill and try to fix those, and then, as the founders intended, to take that to a conference committee and try to produce a product that the nation can accept. I don't know many issues more difficult than this one, and so I guess we will see whether Republicans, in fact, stand as the obstacle to this issue, and whether or not, if they do, it's upon reasonable grounds or upon unreasonable grounds. Our point today, and I think Secretary Cisneros and the others who spoke initially, is we want to look at those points where the Senate bill perhaps isn't perfect, and we want to assist in suggesting how the House might improve the Senate bill and make the point that that is their job and they need to do it, and we believe they can do it. And we've articulated some today, which we'll lay out over the coming weeks, explaining some ways in which they could improve the Senate product. And I think we're all quite confident that they'll do that. This is a process the founders envisioned. As a former member, I can tell you it's always easier to kill a bill than to pass it. And I think this is going to be a challenging process. I think, quite frankly, at this point, each side has staked out its position. The Senate has gone first and put out a product. Now it's the job of the House to do that. There will be flaws in that product. But I'm quite encouraged. I think we've made more progress on this issue than any time since 1986. And I think it's important to understand that, there's a tendency not to trust government to begin with, but as Governor Barber pointed out, on this issue, there's really a kind of a background which encourages distrust. The reality is, as he pointed out, the 1986 Act, the promises made within the 1986 Act, significantly of border security and others, were broken. And so we're working in an atmosphere where there is very little trust. And so a part of our challenge has been, as Secretary Chertoff said, how do we create a dynamic or an atmosphere in which the people will again trust the government on this issue? So I think those are challenges. I don't think it's one party or the other. I think when the House product comes out, there will be pressure upon the Senates to say, okay, upon Senate Democrats to say, are you willing to compromise and move toward the middle? That's the way the system works. We're all participants in the system at one time or another, and we're optimistic that it can be achieved.
Governor, if I may add, Ed Brady is not a partisan Republican Party leader, but he is a Republican nonetheless from Illinois, a member of the commission who is a home builder and who is in line to become a leader of the National Association of Home Builders and has a day-to-day operative viewpoint on this, which may come up in the questioning, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave you out of the Republican spectrum here.
Yes, over here.
Governor Barber, it's always nice to have a governor to come to Texas that speaks without an accent. One of the few places, Governor, that I do without an interpreter.
We're trying to teach Governor Barber a few words in Spanish.
You're sitting next to one of Texas' finest leaders, and I want to thank you for the kind remarks you gave about me. Then Mayor Cisneros, now Secretary, but I must tell you people here at Rice that when he was mayor of San Antonio, he was trying to get a new industry to come to San Antonio, and in his efforts to do so, he claimed Rice was part of San Antonio. With that, he said, yes, San Antonio is growing to the east. I would like to have a serious question, though, as to, and maybe Mr. Secretary Chertoff might be the one to answer since you've been in charge of the law enforcement side. I hear the discussions about how we go about estimating how well we're doing on securing our border, and I found an economy in which the Border Patrol brags about the larger number of drug smuggling or tons of drugs that they've apprehended, and they brag about that being effective, and then they turn and say that we're also very effective on the number of people, and they brag about their success on how few people they've apprehended, and that seemed to me to be kind of an odd way to go about testing success. But I sense the Republicans are looking for a more a better way of determining the security of our borders and assurances that that security will be maintained in order to get them to come across and say, yes, now we can vote for this other part of the bill now that we have a secure border.
Thanks, Governor. Thanks for your leadership as governor here. Let me take a moment and explain what the Border Patrol does in taking this approach. There's a fundamental different business model for people who are smuggling drugs and people who are coming across illegally. And that's why when you're successful at the border, you have higher drug seizures but lower individual apprehensions. For people who are crossing the border simply in order to work, if they estimate that their chance of success is relatively low, they just won't bother. So when you have achieved a certain level of success, you actually see people not making the effort. Drugs, the economics is much different, and it's frankly much more profitable. And therefore, the drug smugglers really will not be easily deterred because they stand to make so much profit that it's worth trying again and again. Additionally, they tend to have much more equipment available. They tend to be able to use tunneling. They tend to be able to use air assets. So you don't really expect to deter them. You expect to really apprehend them, and that's why you get that disparity. I think to the point of trust, though, we've talked a little bit about this. There are different ways to measure success, and it may be that we need to have a kind of an independent body scientifically look at those various measures and help pull together the set of measures that is the best estimation of success. Some of it is literally counting the people who you catch, the people who you turn back, and then subtracting that from the total number of people who try to get across the border so you can identify those who got away. Some of it is looking at border crime statistics, looking at the total number of illegal immigrants who are in the United States, looking at crime rates, looking at the number of people who fly in and fly out. And when you collect all these, I think it is possible to come up with a robust, quite accurate picture of whether we are increasing or decreasing the population of illegal immigrants. But I think this is about coming up with a process that is scientifically tested, that is independently developed, and that will be accepted as trustworthy and reliable by Americans, whatever their political persuasion.
One follow-up question is this Bipartisan Policy Center in a position to make such a recommendation? Because from what I'm seeing, the Democrats are talking about this, Republicans are talking about that, and you hit the nail on the head of coming up with something that actually is effective and can be tested and confirmed over a period of time. And I would see this would be a perfect place for your center to make recommendations that would more or less let both sides sign off on that because of the bipartisan nature of the composition of this commission.
And I think that's exactly what we're talking about, is helping put together a set of recommendations for how to develop these metrics, and also, as importantly, to be able to test them and verify the results, because that's what it's about.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, in the back row.
Thank you. So, a very broad question. I'm completely convinced, I'm a cyber guy here at the Baker Institute, so I've worked with people from every religion and possible country that produces computer engineers. That immigration has served our country quite ably. My question is this. There are two kinds of immigration I think we're talking about. One is, and I wonder how you guys break this down in your conversation, which is, how are you differentiating between the highly skilled immigration we desperately need? What kind of numbers are you throwing around? I mean, and are you having a discussion that's going to hit policymakers on this is the unskilled immigration we need and this is the skilled immigration we need, and how do we align them together or disaggregate them if necessary?
Well, I think it's very important to recognize the contributions that workers make in different dimensions of American life. Clearly, the technical workers, the engineers and computer workers have been renowned for the impact that they've made in that sector. But when you look at the need for workers in the agricultural fields, we heard some numbers today. I can't quote them specifically, but Ed, I think somebody had them. You had them. Something like, when you look at native-born Americans working in the agricultural sector, picking the crops, it's about 4% of Native Americans who will do that work. Similarly, house cleaning, landscaping work, I think it was 1%. Who had that information? You did, Congressman Shattuck. So whatever policy emerges has to be balanced, because so many dimensions of American life in the workplace, the work that we need done, it cannot be easily broken into, well, who's got an education and that's a contribution, or because the manual labor in construction, someone said the other day, you're just not going to find a lot of people who are willing to be on the roof of a house in Phoenix in the summertime, but the houses need to be constructed in Phoenix. And you find workers who do that work. So I think we're being very attentive to that. I'd like to ask Eliseo Medina if he would add a word here. He is the president of the Service Employees International Union for a region of our country and a longtime labor leader. Eliseo, and former Secretary of Labor Hilda Solis is with us as well, who have thoughts, I'm sure, on both of these points, and then we'll go to others.
Well, I would just say that, we're looking at this from a very holistic point of view, and we have a lot of shortages in different areas. And obviously, I'm coming out of an administration that was very much for seeing that we could attract individuals that were highly skilled and talented and trained in the STEM areas. And I think there's general agreement around that issue. But we also have a shortage of folks in other areas where we have needs in construction, service industry, and new entrepreneurs, I think, that can be attracted. We talk about the dreamers, talk about people who are startups, who want to begin their startups. Many of them are immigrants, and the statistics bear out that many of them are the ones who are creating that engine of growth. We want to see that prosperity. So I think we're trying to look very favorably on how we could implement something, blend something that doesn't harm sectors but can help to grow sectors and actually repair our economy, because right now we still have to come out of a very hard, troubling downsizing of our workforce, and we know that if we're going to keep pace with growth and hopefully put back that good percentage of workers, that we really need to attract individuals and create that. So I think that's kind of where we're coming from, and I think what we're trying to do is add value and really look at what the Senate proposal has that has been put forward, and then hopefully come to some kind of compromise or agreement where we can help provide more value. And I think that's important. And just something that I personally feel very strongly about is while we look at bringing in new workers, we also want to be mindful of protecting workers and making sure that all businesses are compliant with rules and regulations to make sure that we don't create a source of skilled labor force out there that is somehow being undermined. That's what we want to get away from, and I don't think the American public wants that to happen. So hopefully we can address all those issues.
Thank you, Secretary Solis, Secretary Cisneros. You know, in full disclosure, I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and the son of a guest worker in the 40s and 50s, and the name of the program then was the Bracero program. And after that, my father was an undocumented worker before we all immigrated legally to this country. And so I have seen firsthand the impact of our broken immigration system going back decades. And from our perspective, and I'm now a union representative, is that we have to do two things. One is that we need to make sure that our existing workforce that is now undocumented is giving a fair opportunity to be able to legalize their status and be able to become full contributors and members of our society through legalization and a path to citizenship. The second thing is how do we deal with the immigration of the future? And that's both for purposes of the high tech, but also for agriculture, as well as other services that support the infrastructure of our society. Because while people will be coming and engineers and others will be helping to innovate and create the economy of the future, there will have to be other workers that will have to be working to support that work. And so, you know, I'm a former farm worker, so I can tell you from firsthand that agriculture is hard work. However, it is very necessary because that's where we get our food. So we have to make sure that we have a balance also of enough workers to be able to do that work. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we create a different channel for the future, the immigrants of the future. It is unsustainable for people to continue coming to this country, walking through the desert, putting their lives in jeopardy, and then creating another group of people that are living in the shadows of our society. So we have to then take a look at all of these things. That's what our task force has been looking at, both, and how do we create that balance so that it both works for our country, economic needs, but at the same time upholds our values as a nation of immigrants.
Just to go specifically to your question real quickly, 2 points that were discussed this morning. One of them is the need to emphasize, to prioritize the economic immigrants. So the need for workers is a priority. And then the second is that the workers, the process by which the levels are identified over time needs to be reflective of the marketplace. So some mechanisms that allow for some calibration depending on what industries require. So the subjects are in general discussion. That's about the best specifics I can give you at the moment.
Just one sentence that might interest you. Today, only 17% of the people who come to our country legally, legal immigrants, come for work. 83% don't come for work, and that's I think speaks to your point. We need more who come.
Family
Yeah,
reinforcement.
we need more who come for work and to help grow our economy.
Just have a question. It seems to me that in the whole debate in the Senate, and from what I hear is who speaks for the border? Let me give you, kind of paint a picture for you. Having lived 12 years in the El Paso, Juarez region, we see that we are choking the economy at the border. It's costing billions and billions of dollars to process people at insufficient ports of entry, without deploying adequate technology, without the right workforce to process all that $1 trillion every 2 years of trade. We see the Border Patrol behaving in a roguish way, firing on people, not disclosing all the human rights violations information that needs to be disclosed, environmental damage done by the wall and other measures. Who speaks for the border? Would some of those $50 billion, and where are they coming from to begin with? Who's going to pay for that? Would they be deployed also at ports of entry? New bridges, new facilities to process trade, cargo, people, and so forth. It seems to me that, as Governor said, let's make sure we do not make the same mistakes. It seems that by over-focusing on the border is a problem of something that originates away from it and ends away from it. We're making the same mistake again, and that we may find ourselves with an impossible situation and punishing people, 18 million people on the border that probably don't deserve it.
So I think there are a couple of things that I agree with, and a couple maybe I don't. One is I think the Senate bill actually does contemplate money invested in the ports of entry, and I agree we're overdue in upgrading money to be spent on ports of entry in order to streamline them and move them further. That has tended to be a lower funding priority for Congress than other elements of it. Second, I also agree that a lot of the problem is what occurs on the interior. It is the draw of illegal employment that brings people in through the border. I will disagree with your comments about the Border Patrol. I think there are always a few bad apples, but I found them to be highly professional and highly skilled, operating in dangerous environments. And frankly, I attended, even one too many funeral for a Border Patrol agent is a tragedy. And I saw a number that lost their lives trying to protect the country. So I do commend them for working under difficult circumstances.
In the back.
Yes, if you could comment, maybe Governor Barber, on this part, and maybe generally, don't you think one of the failures of the Senate bill is that we do not have a big enough, muscular enough temporary workers program? By the way, I think that was one of the faults of the '86 Act, because it did not allow for any entry of low-skilled workers. And secondly, this may sound crass, but I think you're speaking to the converted here. Don't you think everyone should leave here and contact Kevin Brady and Ted Poe and
Amen. Amen. I think you get unanimous agreement on that. Let me just give you a little example. Senator Kennedy, when he was living, he thought, and he put in his legislation, immigration reform legislation, that the guest worker program number ought to be 400,000. And indeed, one bill Kennedy sponsored, 500,000. But the Senate has put 200,000 in their bill, and it's a cap, right? It's not a starting place.
I think technically it's 20,000.
That's right.
It starts
Yeah,
at
and
20,000.
the ending place is 200.
Right.
And so it seems to me that Senator Kennedy was right.
Mr. Brady, would you like to? I'm sorry, our Congressman.
I'd like to address this because I strongly agree with the point you made. The American people have said one thing very clearly. They'd like this problem solved, but they want it solved once. They do not want us to do this now, legalize the current 11 million, and then be right back in the same position in 10 years or 15 years. And I believe what you have identified is a significant flaw in the Senate bill. The cap on temporary workers starts at 20,000 and, as the governor said, goes up to only 200,000. That is dramatically smaller than even Senator Kennedy was willing to insert. But there's really more to the problem than that. Quite frankly, the Senate bill the guest worker provision of the Senate bill was written, I would argue, by big business and big labor. And it creates an incredibly complex and therefore incredibly expensive process to be able to take advantage of it. The employer first has to be certified as an employer who can hire foreign workers. Then the employer has to get the job certified as a job for which you can hire a foreign worker, and then the foreign worker has to be certified. So the cost of that process and the time taken, for example, you have to tell the government not only how many employees you're going to want, but when you're going to want them. That is a system which I would argue is completely unworkable for small businesses. And I would submit that most of the illegals today, I think this is accurate, work for small businesses. Large businesses often can afford to comply with the law or don't want to take the risk of employing an illegal. Small businesses are the ones that are employing the illegals and perhaps exploiting them, which is not good. And by the way, using their labor and not paying the taxes on them, so that's cheating the economy or cheating the country. I think a major flaw in the Senate bill is that it needs to have added to it a workable program for guest workers that can be taken advantage of by small businesses. The reality is, if you don't kind of turn off the magnet, which brings workers across illegally, then they will continue to cross illegally. And the way you have to turn that magnet off is to say to small business, look, we're going to give you a relatively uncomplicated way in order to hire a worker and make sure that that worker has been vetted so that we've done a background check and a security check. But we simplify that system so we don't repeat the mistake of the 1986 Act. And I think that's one of the things I hope the House will look at, because if we don't look at that and illegal immigration continues, there will be multiple tragic consequences. One, we'll have to address this again in 10 years, but two, there'll continue to be a group of people who are living underground and can't report the crimes against themselves or their communities. There'll be people working for below minimum wage. There'll be people working for whom taxes aren't withheld and workers' compensation isn't paid. All kinds of exploitation of that community, which is not in our nation's interest.
I think we're going to take one more question. Yes, over here.
I think I understand the politics of it, but at a time of scarce resources, does 40,000 Border Patrol agents really make sense? That's a question for Secretary Chertoff.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, we do live in a budget-constrained time. We're cutting in all kinds of areas. And I would add to that the fact that training and giving field experience to 20,000 additional agents is a very, very challenging task, and it's going to take a long time. During my tenure, we went up, I think about double, up to 20,000, and even that was challenging. So, I appreciate the importance of putting adequate resources into the issue. It may be that as a result of the discussion, particularly if some result-focused ways of judging success are developed and put into the legislative process, it may be that number is modified. It may be that it turns out that some of that money can be used for other things that are enforcement related, including interior enforcement and what I think is a critical part, maybe the most critical part, which is an employment verification system that really clamps down on that magnet of illegal employment, which is, I still think, the greatest engine that drives illegal immigration.
Thank you all for being here today. If you want any more information about Bipartisan Policy Center, you can find it on our website at bipartisanpolicy.org, or you can continue this conversation on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. Thank you very much.